So I figure I'll have to get into some 90s alternative rock at some point. But I kind of want to ease into it. I don't want to jump straight into Smashing Pumpkins or something that might leave all of us disappointed. And that's what we're going to do here today on Nostalgia Academy, because in the 1990s, there was a sound that felt exactly like summer. It was jangly guitars, bright melodies, and songs that seemed like they were made to be played out of a car stereo with the windows down while you were driving nowhere in particular. And one of the bands that defined that feeling more than almost anyone else was the Gin Blossoms. I know, maybe not alternative, we'll find out. But what most people don't realize is that behind that sunshine sound, behind the hooks and the radio friendliness of it, and let's face it, MTV-friendly faces, there was a story that was far more complicated, far more painful, and in some ways deeply tragic, because Gin Blossoms weren't just a feel-good 90s band. They were a band built out of a small Arizona bar scene shaped by addiction and loss and the kind of emotional weight that never really leaves the music, even when the songs sound happy. I love stuff like that. It all started in Tempe, Arizona, in the late 1980s, a place that wasn't exactly known for producing major rock acts, but they had a pretty tight local music scene, apparently, centered around some bars like Long Wongs and others, where bands would play night after night, kind of slowly building a following the old-fashioned way, just by being good on stage. And that's where Gin Blossoms came together, with Robin Wilson on vocals, Jesse Valenzuela on guitar, Bill Lean on bass, and Doug Hopkins on guitar. Don't forget that name, because he was not just another band member, but one of the key creative forces behind their early sound. They weren't polished like any band starting out. They weren't purpose-built. They were a working bar band, learning to how to write songs that stuck, how to play tight enough to keep people listening, and how to turn personal frustrations into melody. Again, I love that kind of stuff. For years, they stayed local, surviving on gigs and word of mouth, until eventually that slow grind started to turn into something bigger. When they signed to a major label and recorded New Miserable Experience, their debut album, nothing about the beginning suggested instant success. In fact, the album didn't explode right away, which if you listen to it now, you're like, how'd that happen? How'd they miss that? It kind of sat there at first, almost ignored, until one song started to break through in a way that nobody fully expected, and that song, of course, was Hey Jealousy. Written by Doug Hopkins years earlier, it's a track that on the surface sounds upbeat and catchy, and it is, with its bright guitars and memorable chorus, but lyrically, it really is something different entirely. It's a story about desperation and instability emotionally, showing up at an ex's door and trying to hold on to something that's already gone. When the label finally pushed it as a single, it started to climb. The whole album did. And suddenly Gin Blossoms went from a regional Arizona band to national act almost overnight. The irony was already forming because the man who wrote one of the biggest hits was no longer in the band when it took off. And I remember it taking off. I think I was in Arkansas by then. And I remember one day there was no Gin Blossoms, and the next day they were everywhere, especially Hey Jealousy. That was a big one. Doug Hopkins was struggling heavily with alcoholism, and God bless him, because I've been there too. And the band moved into the studio and into the industry machine, and that's where tensions started building. There were issues with recording sessions, mistakes, friction with management, and growing pressure from the label to get the sound right? They knew what they wanted them to sound like, so whatever. Eventually, the decision was made to remove Hopkins from the band, and just as Hey Jealousy was starting its rise on the charts, just as the world was discovering his songwriting, he was no longer part of the group, benefiting from it, and I cannot imagine what that's like. Not long after, in late 1993, Doug Hopkins died by his own hand, we'll say, and that moment cast a shadow over everything that came after, because now the band wasn't just dealing with success, they were dealing with the fact that their breakthrough song was tied directly to someone they had lost, someone that brought them that success. And I don't know, anytime someone does that, I just feel so bad for everyone left behind, and especially for them too. But despite that, the momentum continued. Hey Jealousy broke through nationally, followed by Found Out About You, another song that same emotional tone. It's really dark. If you watch the closed captions during that video, that's a dark, dark song. It's got the same blend of catchy instrumentation and, uneasy lyrics about obsession, jealousy, and emotional spiraling, that kind of became the Gin Blossoms' identity almost without them planning it. Songs that sounded like sunshine but carried something darker underneath. Something that makes you feel nostalgic and a little uneasy at the same time. Right in my wheelhouse. That contrast is what made them stand out in the crowded 90s alternative scene filled with grunge, college rock, and emerging pop rock crossover acts. You know, the grunge side, you know, had the daddy issue songs and all that forever, but they weren't writing bright pop around it, which I really, really liked. As their popularity grew, so did the pressure. Of course, touring increased, expectations increased, and internally, the band was still dealing with the aftermath of Hopkins' death, while also trying to function as a rising mainstream act, one that now has to come up with a second album. That's got to be tough. But in 1995, they hit another major peak with Till I Hear It From You, a song that they wrote alongside Marshall Crenshaw, which you can tell it sounds like a Marshall Crenshaw song. It became huge after appearing on the Empire Strikes Back. It became huge after appearing on Empire Records soundtrack. It was cleaner, more polished, more radio-friendly than their earlier work, and it pushed them even further into mainstream success. At that point, the Gin Blossoms weren't just an alternative band anymore. They were a full-on 90s radio staple, the kind of band you heard everywhere, whether you were looking for them or not. But like a lot of bands from that era, the peak didn't last forever. The mid to late 90s music landscape began shifting, much like it did, you know, in the late 80s and such. Alternative rock was changing. Grunge had already peaked and faded. And new sounds were coming in, you know, think hip-hop and stuff like that. Gin Blossoms, they eventually slowed down. Members pursued other projects. The band itself was kind of going through a breakup and eventual reunions over the years. They never completely disappeared. I mean, I think they still play to this day. But they also never quite recaptured that exact moment when everything aligned. And they were one of the defining sounds of American radio. And maybe that's what makes their story interesting, even decades later, because Gin Blossoms aren't just remembered for their hits. Now, they had, you know, the two main albums, The New Miserable Experience and, what is that? Congratulations, I'm Sorry. Those are really good records. Congratulations, I'm Sorry, kind of lesser, but it's still good. But they did put one out later. I forget what it's called. It's got a blue cover, like 10, 15 years ago, maybe. Not bad at all. It was fine. But that's why Hey Jealousy still hits the way it does. Why Found Out About You still feels heavier than it should. And that's why, you know, Till I Hear It From You, and any of them from the second record, Till I Fall Away. It's another great one. And Allison Road from New Miserable Experience. That's just as good as any single they've ever done. But that might be why, because underneath the jangly guitars and the radio-friendly production, there's always something unresolved, something kind of human, maybe a little broken, but still melodic enough that you keep listening anyway. And I really like that. And that's really the legacy of Gin Blossoms, not just the 90s band with catchy songs, although they were, but a band where the light and the shadow were always kind of playing at the same time. And that's a neat way to be, I think. Later on, lead singer Robin Wilson would do some shows with the Smithereens as guest vocalist. I thought he sounded pretty good. You can find the videos on YouTube. I also saw them recently on Good Morning America celebrating the 30th anniversary of something or other. And none of them looked like they could even be bothered. They didn't look like they wanted to be there. They were just going through the motions. They played the song. Well, they played the song, and they had already put in their dues, and I'm okay with that. I did get to see them one time live at the Coastal Carolina Fair in Ladson, South Carolina. Robin was about half an hour late, but they played all the hits, and the place was packed out. I mean, I don't think anybody ever just checked out on them. They've always kind of liked them. So what do you think? Not a bad way to tiptoe into some 90s alternative rock. At this point, you know, did you even consider Gin Blossoms an alternative band? Lots of folks would say no, and I would totally understand. You could fight that. But I give them a high score on the jangle music sound, so I'm letting them in. The jangly guitars, if you got them, you're in. Once again, thanks so much for checking us out at Nostalgia Academy. We ain't got much, but we got love. Make sure to like, subscribe, do the things. Check out our website, Facebook, and Instagram. We're working on that as well. Also, make sure to check out some of our other fine videos. And until next time, you guys take care, and I'll see you on the next one.